Hey, welcome back to the Crabby Dice. Today we're going to be looking at Tzolkin, the Mayan calendar. So this is the rules and setup video. If you want to see the playthrough and my thoughts, click on the link below. So what's the theme to this game? Well, I'm not really sure what it is. We're in charge of a tribe or something. We're trying to please the gods and score a bunch of points. Alright, so before we start, please like, subscribe, and comment on my videos. That'll be amazing. Let's go! Alright, for setup, you're gonna set out the game board. It's a bunch of puzzle pieces. Just slap them all together and make sure the gears turn in the middle. You can have the starting place be a blue location. Either side works. Alright, for our Palenque section up here, we need to set up according to the number of players. So if you're playing 2 or 3 players, only use certain spots. If you're playing 4 players, fill them all up. And you're going to fill them up equal to the player count. So here you're going to put only corn. Here you're going to put corn and then wood on top. Same thing here and same thing here. So I'm simulating a 3-player game over here. Alright, next you're going to put 3 of every player's workers over here. And we're going to put 1 of every player's marker on the 4 technology and on the 4 tracks. So try to do this as fast as possible. So it's going to be the white spaces on the tracks over here and the beginning spaces of the tech tracks over here. Next we're going to set up our monuments, which is the top row here. So you do have a monument stack here, so give it a good shuffle. If you're 4 players, fill them all up. If you're 3, remove 1. If you're 2, remove 2. I'm going to play 3 players, so I'll fill up all but 1. And I'll teach you in the rules how these work. You can throw these back in the box, they won't be used anymore. Next, you're going to have 2 other stacks of buildings. You have the 1 dot and the 2 dot. So you're going to shuffle the 2 dots and just put them on the side of the board. You won't use them until you get to the halfway point of the game. Then you'll use the 1 dot. So shuffle them and you'll fill up the whole row. So the top row is for monuments, the bottom row is for buildings. You can put the stack next to the board. We're going to use these to fill it up later. Alright. You're going to take the point scoring marker of each player. They're a bit thicker than the markers that are on the board. You're going to put them on the 0 space. Alright. Let's go to our player board area. And for player board, it's very simple. You're going to give them just the tile here, light side up, and 3 workers. Figure out who first player is and give them this token. Next, you're going to give each player 4 of these wealth tiles. Each player is going to pick 2 and start with those resources, but I'll get to this a little bit later. And what you're going to do is, if you are playing with less than 4 players, alright, there's going to be a remaining stack of wealth tiles. Okay, if you're playing 3, you need to put 6 of the neutral players' tokens on the board so that they block certain spots to make it a tighter game. So what you're going to do is you're going to flip over a tile and you're going to read the bottom of the tile. So here it says Uxmal 3. So you're going to find Uxmal 3 here and you're going to put a token on it. Alright, if it's the first token you put in a circle, you place one on the exact opposite side. Like that. Now, you're going to keep going until you put in 6 in a 3-player game or 12 in a 2-player game. So I'm just going to keep going. Uxmal 5. Wow. It's going to be a very tight Uxmal area this game, I think. This is a Yaxchilan 3, which is over there. And we got 1 more. The only exception is if you ever get a chicken Itza tile, you don't place it on the other side, you only place 1 tile. And you have Palenque 3. And there you go, we're set up. In the rules, I'll teach you what the wealth tiles mean. In the meantime, what I like to do is, instead of putting the the corn in the middle, I just keep all my resources in a plano like this, and when players need them, you just reach it in. I'll just keep it in front of the board over here. Alright, let's talk about these starting wealth tiles. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick 2 out of the 4, and those are going to be your starting resources for the game. So there's different things you can gain. So if you see a chart like this, it means technologies. So for example, if I want to start with this one and this one, I'd have 1 tick up on the top technology and 1 on the second technology. Another thing you can get is just general resources. So 1 stone, 1 gold, 1 wood. Here's corn. There are these idle spaces, so I'll show you all three versions of it. So these mean which tracks you'll start up on. So brown, you'll go up on the brown track, yellow the yellow, and obviously green on the green track. The only extra thing besides crystal skulls, which just looks like that, I just take it from the general supply, is an icon like this, which means that you don't have to feed one of your workers when it's time to feed your workers. Alright, that's it. Those are all the options. You pick two, toss the other ones in the box, collect your resources, you're ready to go. Let's go to rules. Alright, welcome to the rules overview for Tzolkin, the Mayan calendar. So at a high level, what kind of game is this? Well, it's pretty self-evident. It is just a pure worker placement game with sort of a time mechanism, right? So on your turn, you're either going to be placing your workers on the gears or you're going to be pulling the workers to get the rewards on the board. Alright, sort of that's what's going on. Alright, how do you win? It's a euro. So you have a nice point track along the outside of the board, and whoever has the most points at the end of the game is gonna win. So there's a ton of places to score. Go to the end of my video, I'll teach you, but you got the god tracks up here, the monuments give you points, the crystal skulls over here, plenty of different ways. I'll explain it to you later in the video. Alright, let's talk about round structure. It's fairly easy. The game's going to last between 24 and 27 rounds, depending on how many people use their double action. But when this gear does a full rotation, it's going to trigger the end game. Alright, so when you come back, it'll trigger full rotation, and that's the end. Every single turn, you're going to be following the same 3 steps. Alright. First step, very simple, it's the player turns, right? So on your turn, like I already mentioned, you're either going to be placing workers or pulling them to get rewards. The second thing you're going to do every turn is check if it's a feeding round. Yes, this is a dreaded feed your worker game. So if we're ever on a turn with these colored gear symbols, for example like this, you're going to have to feed your workers. So we'll get to that later in the video. And the third thing you're going to do every round is just move the gear 1 extra space. Alright, I'm going to go into detail on how the worker placements mechanism works in this one because it's pretty unique. And then we're going to talk about every single action space on the board. I'm going to talk about the god tracks and the technology, and then we'll talk about scoring at the end. So let's get started. Alright, let's talk about player turns first. So when it's your turn, you either place as many workers as you want between 1 and 6, or pull as many workers as you want between 1 and 6. Placing workers just puts them on the board so that eventually the gear will rotate so they get at a better position every single time. Pulling means you're going to gain the reward of where the worker currently is. Alright, I'll show you both of these with examples. So let's talk about placement first. Alright, there's sort of 3 rules for placement. First is it must be placed at the lowest possible number for that gear. Okay, so in an example here, if I wanted to place my worker on the red gear, he would have to go on the 0 space. When we talk about 0, 1, or 2 space, it's the amount of corn you have to pay to go into that spot, right? So if I want to come on this gear, he would have to go on the 0 space. If I wanted to come on the yellow gear, I would have to go on the 1 space because the 0 space is already occupied. Alright, so that's a general base rule for placement. Alright, after that, the second and third thing you sort of have to consider is the payment of corn. Alright, so there's 2 things you need to follow. Is A, I already mentioned, is the corn value of the spot you're taking. So for here, I would have to pay 1 corn to put my worker here, and there would be 0, there would be 0, there would be 1, and let's say this would be 1 as well. Alright. The second payment you have to make is if you're playing more than 1 worker in a turn, which is possible. So for example, my turn could have been this, and let's just say this. If you're playing more than 1 worker in a turn, you need to look at this chart and pay extra because you played extra workers. So what you're going to do is the total is on the left, but every step is written on the right. So by playing 3 workers this round, I'm going to have to pay 3 extra corn. So in total, if I played my workers like this, I would have to pay 3, 4, 5, 6. I would have to pay 6 corn to the bank. So this placement would only be legal if I did have 6 corn in my possession. If not, I wouldn't even be able to place my workers like this. Alright, this is how the main mechanism for placement works. Your other option on your turn is to pull your workers to gain a benefit. So let's say a couple of rounds go by, so on and so on. You can pull as many workers as you want to gain a benefit, and you decide the order in which you pull them. So I can pull off a worker here to gain the benefit of the current spot of the gear that he's on, and same thing for every other worker that I want to pull off. Let's say this one I can do this, and then this one I can do this, just as an example. Again, you can pull off as many as you want. You can pull off just one and let the other guys sit on the gears so that they keep advancing on the gears for a later turn. There is also a rule that you can actually activate an action on a previous space on the same wheel that you're at, but you need to pay 1 corn every step that is behind you. So for example, if I was here and I wanted to gain an extra worker instead, I can pay 1 corn when activating this worker or pulling the worker to pretend that he was 1 step before. All right. Same thing for every other track. Let's say I was here and I really want to move up 2 times on the tech track here. I would activate this worker, pull him, and pay 2 corn to pretend that he was here. Okay? Now, before we start going into every gear and every single spot, and I'll explain to you every single action available in the game, let's just talk about begging for corn. So I'm just going to mention this one time. If you ever have less than 3 corn in your possession at the start of your turn, so that's before placement or before pulling, what you can do is beg for corn. You're going to draw back up to 3 corn. So whether you're at 2 or 1 or 0, you go up to 3 corn, and you'll move down on one of the god tracks. The gods are angry at you because you begged for corn. So let's just say I go down on the yellow 1, I draw up to 3 corn, and then I'd start my turn. All right, so that's begging for corn. And then you just do your regular placement or pulling of workers. All right, let's start talking about the actions on the board. Alright, the first gear I want to tackle is the Palenque gear up here. That's where we're going to be sending our workers to the jungle to either chop down wood or gather corn from the fields that we currently have there. Alright, so the way this whole gear works is you're going to be pulling off a chit, and that chit represents the amount of resources indicated in the section that you're pulling it off. Alright, so for example, if I'm activating this section here by pulling off this worker, I'm going to pull off a chit by keeping this in my personal supply. And this chit represents 4 corn because that's what's indicated there. I would take 4 corn from the general supply. Alright, so you can sort of see it becomes like a first come first serve basis type thing, because when all the chits are gone, you're out of luck, you can't get resources anymore. You can with the text, but I'll get to the text in a little bit. Okay. Now the exception to that rule is also the first spot here. This is fishing. So you always can get 3 corn. There's no chits available here. I'm going to mention this now. It's the same thing for every other gear. The last 2 spots of every gear is just a wild that represents as if you were on any spot before it. So by activating this action spot here, I can pretend my worker was on any spot along the gears here. Okay? Now, besides taking a chit, the other option you have is, if you really want to get to a corn chit and it's only wood chits available, you can burn down the forest. For example, if I was activating this worker here by pulling back, and I really want to get to that corn chit underneath that wood, I can burn down the forest by removing this chit from the game. Alright? By doing that though, you always anger the gods. Every time you burn down the forest, the gods get mad, and you need to lower yourself down once on any of the tracks of your choice. You pick a track and you go down. Alright, but that'll give you the ability to now take the corn chit, which can now represent a lot of corn. So it would be 9 corn here. Alright, let's talk about the tech now, because this whole first row of tech deals only or solely with the Palenque gear. Alright, so let's go through them one by one. If you have the first tech here, every time you get corn from spots 2 to 5, you get an extra corn. The second spot here is every time you get corn from fishing, you get a +1. Or if you get corn from spots 2 to 5, you can get corn even though there's no corn chits available. Alright, you don't have to pull off a corn chit. For example, here, if I activated this action spot here, if I had the second tech, I would still be able to get corn. And then the third tech is just an extra +2 corn. So all the techs are cumulative. So for example, if I activated this spot here, I could, because there's no chit, and I'll get an extra +3 corn because I would get +2 for that one and +1 for the first tech. Alright, so that's all the rules for the Palenque gear. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, the second gear I want to tackle is the gray mountain space here. I can't really pronounce the name, so I'll be calling it the gray gear. And this gear is just getting resources, right? So by activating certain spots, you collect resources so you can get wood, stone, gold, and even crystal skulls. Alright. The general supply for all of these goods in the general supply are unlimited. So if you do run out of a certain type, just find a replacement. Except for the crystal skulls, there's only ever 13 in the game. So when somebody has taken the 13th one, nobody else can gain a crystal skull. Alright. Again, just like every other gear, the last 2 spots, when you activate that, just pretend you're activating any other space on that gear. And the only last thing we need to really talk about is the technology. So the second row here deals with gathering resources. So if you had the first tech, every time you gain wood, you gain a +1 wood. So that deals with both Palenque and the gray gear. Second tech just gives you an extra stone. And the third tech just gives you an extra gold whenever you gathered gold. So it is cumulative, so if you activated the last spot here, you will get 2 gold and 2 stone because you were on the third tech. Alright, let's talk about the next gear. Alright, the red gear is the Takal gear and it deals solely with buildings and technology. Alright, so when you see these charts here, that means technology, and it lets you move up the amount of arrows below it. So for example, the first spot here lets you move up once on any of the technology tracks, and the cost is the amount of resources at the top of the column. So the cost of the first space on any of the rows would be 1 resource of any type, and the next tick would be 2 resources of any type, and the one after that would be 3 resources of any type. I'll mention it now. If you're ever at the end and you move up again, it's going to cost you 1 resource of any type, and you gain the benefit of what's in the little box onto the right. Alright, now on the third spot here, you go up twice, and you get to choose whether it would be twice on the same track or once on 2 different tracks. So for example, if I was like this, I'd go up once here and once here by paying 3 resources. Alright, so those are the techs. Now this is just a building. So it's the bottom row here. Oops. And if you activate that, you get to build one of your buildings down here by paying the cost at the top. So if you had, let's say, 2 wood, you'd pick up this and you'd activate the benefit of the building. I'm not going to go into every single building because there's a bunch of different symbols and benefits you can get for building a building. All right. The fourth spot here lets you build 1 or 2 buildings or build a monument. So the monuments are up here and they work just like buildings. You pay the cost that's on the top, and they are all endgame scoring tiles. So look at the back of the manual and they all stand for a different endgame scoring thing, just like forest tiles, blue buildings and monuments, crystal skulls on the chicken Itza gear, and so on and so on. Alright, the final spot here is moving yourself up on the God track. You can pay 1 resource of any type to move up 1 tick on 2 different temples. So by paying 1 resource, I can go up once on the brown and once on the yellow, for example. They must be 2 different tracks. And again, just like every other track, I'll just keep mentioning it, the last 2 spots pretty much mean you can activate any other action on that gear when you activate that spot. Alright, let's talk about the tech. So there is a tech row that deals just solely with the Takal gear that's down here. And these just mean when you build a building, you'll get a corn. When you build a building, you'll get 2 points. So move yourself up on the point track. And the last one is when you build a building, you get to build it at one less resource. So for example, this would cost you only 1 wood and not 2 wood. There's an exception to this rule. If you build 2 buildings using this spot, only your first or second building you can use the benefits of the row here. Your one of your 2 buildings you will not be able to gain the benefit. Right, and just like every other tech row, it is cumulative. So if you were going to build a building and you were on the 3rd tech, you get 1 resource discount, and you get 2 points, and you get 1 corn every time you build a building. All right, let's move on to the next gear. All right, the yellow gear is Uxmal, and it represents sort of the commercial center of our city, and all of these deal with exchanging corn or resources for something. So let's talk about all these actions. So the first one is pay 3 corn to move up on once on any temple track. The second action space here is doing conversions. That's where you're going to look at this chart over here, and you can do as many conversions as you want back and forth between wood, stone, to corn, to gold, however you like. So for example, if you had 10 corn and 2 wood, you can exchange some wood into corn and then exchange some corn into gold and vice versa. So you get to perform as many conversions as you like. The third spot here is get an extra worker. Remember, you're going to get an extra worker from here. You can get a maximum of an extra 3 per game, so you can be up to 6. The next spot here is building buildings, but with corn instead of resources. All right. So for every resource that's on the building, you're going to have to pay 2 corn instead. So for example, this building here would cost 4 corn instead of a wood and a stone. Right? You also don't get the option of paying half in resources and half in corn. You have to pay it all in corn. For example, this here would cost you 8 corn to build this building. And the last spot here is just a wild. You get to perform any action that's on any wheel, from the green to the gray to the red to the yellow gears. All right, you just have to pay 1 corn as an added cost to any action. So if the action already had a cost, you'd have to pay an extra corn as well. All right, and just like every other gear, the last 2 spots represent any other action on that gear. Just pick one. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, the last and easiest gear to explain is Chicken Itza. So this is where you're going to be using up crystal skulls that you have in your personal supply. So when you activate that action, you're going to be placing your crystal skull in the little white circle space, and you'll gain the benefit below it. So the different things you can get along the track, there's resources you can pick up, there's the actual idol will tell you which temple track you'll move up on, and you'll get points what's in the brown box. All right, this whole section is the only gear in the game where as soon as somebody activates that spot, nobody else can now activate this spot because there's a gear, a skull already on it. Okay, let's talk about this tech that goes with this track. The first tech here means that when you activate the action spot, you can actually place your skull on the following space. So for example, like this. All right. The next one is whenever you activate a Chicken Itza action space, you can pay 1 resource to move once on any of the temple tracks. And the third tech here means when you get a crystal skull from the gray gear here, you'll actually get a second one. And there you go. Just like every other track, the last one here lets you activate any of the Chicken Itza action spots before it, as long as it doesn't already have a skull. Alright, besides the locations on the gears, the only other place you can place your worker if nobody has already taken it is you can go on the starting player spot right over here. Alright, the only benefit you get right away for doing this is any corn that has been accumulated on the gears. So in this case, I take this, and we'll look at phase 3 on how these get placed on the gears, and also the other benefits you'll get from this you'll also gain in phase 3, so go see that section of the video for more of an explanation. Alright, phase 2 is the food a day / feed your worker phase. Alright, this only happens if you encounter a food day sticker on the gear. Alright, so this doesn't happen during the first round of the game, but eventually you will hit the first one as soon as you hit the orange one here. And then after phase 1, which is everyone does their action, you're going to actually have to feed your workers. This means that any worker that you currently have on the gears or in your personal supply, you're gonna have to pay 2 corn. All right, you must pay as much as you can, and for every worker that you can't pay corn for, you'll lose 3 points. So if you couldn't pay for 2 workers, you'll lose 6 points on the track. All right. After feeding your people, if it's an orange food day sticker, you're gonna get resources from the temple. All right, you're gonna see where your markers are and get resources on the left-hand side going down. So for example, in this here, I would get 1 stone, I'd get no gold because there's none below me, and I would get 2 wood and a crystal skull. All right. Eventually you'll hit midway of the game, which is the first blue food day sticker. This one, just like the orange ones, you'll feed your people, and then afterwards you're going to score your temples instead of getting resources. So the way scoring works is you're going to score what's on the right wherever your markers are. So here I'll have 4, 1, and 7 points. You'll also score whoever is highest on each of the 3 tracks. So halfway through the game, you're going to look at the left-hand number. So 6, 2, and 4. For any ties, you'll just divide that number by 2 and distribute. All right, even if you're 3 or 4 players and you're all tied, just divide that number by 2 and just give it to everyone. All right. Now, there's a special thing that happens halfway through the game. You're going to remove all the level 1 buildings and start replacing them with the level 2 buildings. And then you move on to the next round. Then you'll hit another orange food day. You'll just play it as normal. And finally, you'll hit the last blue food day, which is going to trigger the end game. And during that food day, after feeding your workers, you're going to score the temples, but this time looking at the right-hand number instead of the left-hand one. So it's going to be 2, 6, and 4. Again, for any ties, you'll divide it by 2 and give the same amount to all the players. All right, the third phase of every single round is advancing the calendar. That's where you're going to move the gear 1 notch forward. So you're going to go move the gear head 1 notch forward. All right, that's going to move all the other gears 1 space as well. Okay. Now the first thing you're going to check is if nobody had placed their token on the first player space here, you're going to add a corn from the general supply onto the gear head here. All right. If there was somebody there, you wouldn't place the corn. All right. The second thing you're going to check is if any player's piece looking around the gears is past the final space of any gear, that marker would get returned to the player. For example, this one would get passed and returned to the player. And also, the player who had placed their player piece on the first player spot would also get this worker returned to them. All right, when that happens, 2 things are going to happen. First, you're going to give him the headdress, which is the first player marker, so he'll be first player next turn. And next, he's going to have a choice to turn his player board to the dark side to move the gear 1 extra time. For example, like this. All right. There's only one restriction that prevents you from doing that. If at any point, for example, if it was like this, if anybody's player piece on any of the gears is on the final spot, and you would kick them out by changing the gear an extra time, you would not be able to do that action. For example, I would not be able to move the gear again because yellow would have their token kicked out, right? So you can't forcibly move somebody off the gear, right? And also another rule is even if you move it past the food day, you're not going to skip that food day. You're just going to treat that food day as if it was on that gear instead of the previous one. All right, so for example, if we were doing this round, you move the calendar, then that player would use his 2x bonus to move it again. You do the food day at the end of that round because you skipped a sticker. And finally, you get to endgame scoring. So that's where you're going to look at the little chart here in the bottom left of the board. So just follow the steps. So first, turn in all your resources into corn. So use this chart over here. So wood, you get 2 corn. Gold, you get 4 corn, so on and so on. Then for every 4 corn, you'll get a point. You'll score 3 points for each crystal skull you have at the end of the game. And then finally, all your monuments will score because they're all endgame scoring cards. Alright, that's how you play. Click on the link below for the playthrough, or I'll see you on the next game.